privilege of working on behalf of America's dairy farmers on some really groundbreaking work around sustainability, and it's really exciting to be here. Now, over time, farms and consumers have become more and more disconnected, and we as an industry felt a need to better communicate what we're doing and also to continuously improve progress. You see, sustainability has long been intrinsic to dairy. It all started with farmers growing their own feed to give their cows, and then using the manure to fertilize their crops to give their cows in a virtuous cycle. Now, before I go into more specifics around our sustainability commitment, I'd like to take just a minute and share why I'm particularly excited to be here. You see, my journey into sustainability and especially coffee did not begin with an invitation to this conference. In 2008 and 2009, I worked with TechnoServe in East Africa, helping to improve farmer livelihoods through access to markets and through improving their agricultural practices. I saw firsthand the need for sustainable agriculture for a prosperous world, and really for smallholders, of course, that meant finding those market linkages, but it also meant getting a handle on the pests and diseases that plague the region. I've heard a lot of discussion today about leaf rust. I've heard it yesterday. It's an issue everywhere. And I'm pretty sure most of you guys are familiar with berry borer, which is that horrible little thing on the left side. But that bug on the right, does anybody here know what that is? Have I truly stumped everybody? So that's intestia, and it's unique to Rwanda, and it's what gives coffee the potato taste that you guys might be familiar with. I was curious because it was a huge problem about 5 years ago, and I'd be interested if any progress is being made on addressing it. So back to why I'm here today. We've done a lot of research on fluid milk consumption in coffee, and if it isn't clear already, I'm going to show you a few more facts and figures that speak to just how important it is for both industries. Our research shows that for total ages in the United States, about a third of all coffee servings in the country include milk. For our beloved millennials, that number goes up to about 42%. And that's great news for the dairy industry, and it's great news for coffee, and it means a lot of milk being sold disguised as coffee products. Which brings me to my next point. On behalf of America's dairy farmers, I'd like to thank the coffee industry for flavoring our products. You see, specialty coffee drinks have gone up 18% in the past 5 years, and we've seen that lattes, and let's be real people, that's just steamed milk with some coffee in it, have gone up 7% in the last year alone. As this trend continues to grow, we feel like we've got a really great story to tell around our sustainability efforts that can tie into a consumer base that goes to a coffee shop and really cares about this stuff. So before we go any further, and to keep things interactive and fun, and the folks in the room that are dairy can't answer these questions, I have a few for the audience. And the first is, how many dairy farms are there in the United States? And please, I welcome some guesses.
20,000.
Okay, that's good. We have 20,000, a little bit higher. Nobody?
50,000.
There you go. Really good. 49,000. So of those farms, 97% of them are family-owned and operated, and dairy is in all 50 states. So unless you have, that blessing of living in Hawaii, you really don't have that story for the origin of your beans. And I thought that Jill's story a minute ago about her dairy and the work that she's doing can really translate well into local sourcing stories for people that go to a coffee shop. The next question, how many dairy cows are there in the United States? Guesses?
50 million.
Nope, 9 million. But of those, the average herd size is about 187 cows per farm. 2 more questions. Per animal, per year, how many pounds of milk does a typical dairy cow produce in the United States?
1,000.
I hear 1,000, 2,000, 21,000. That translates to about 2,500 gallons, and I did a quick metric conversion before I came up here because of our international audience. It's about 9,500 liters. This has actually increased a great bit over the last few decades due to increases in advances in cow comfort, health, and breeding. And it speaks to some efficiencies that tie into sustainability that I'll talk about a bit here in a minute. And then my final question, and the math whizzes in the audience may have already figured this out. In a given year, how much milk is produced in pounds in the United States? 200 billion pounds. It's actually about 193 billion pounds, which is about 90 billion kilograms. And that makes the United States the largest producer of fluid milk in the world. So now back to the focus of this conversation, which is really U.S. dairy and the commitment that we're making to sustainability. In 2008, leaders from across the dairy supply chain came together for the first time to answer one very large, very challenging question, which is how can we continue to improve our business while reducing our environmental impact? At this summit, an industry commitment was made to be leaders in sustainability. Now, why did we do this? There's a lot of common trends between coffee and dairy, and I think two of these reasons are going to resonate with you guys. The first is the need to do more with less. And I'm sure that you guys have all heard this pitch before, but against the grain of increasing population, increasing consumption, and finite resources, it's an absolute imperative to be as efficient and environmentally responsible as you can in agriculture. The second is the need to demonstrate progress. You see, for the dairy industry, customers and consumers are increasingly seeking assurance that the dairy supply chain is environmentally responsible and maintaining long-term community well-being and economic viability for dairy farms. And of course, in coffee, this has been something you've seen for a very long time. So following the summit that we had back in 2008, we realized there was no home for this work to continue. And farmers actually came together, 34 chairmen and CEOs representing about 80% of fluid milk in the country, to develop the Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy. It's really focused on advancing pre-competitive science, strategy, and insights that can benefit the whole industry and are too big for any one organization or company to target alone. I could go into detail on a lot of this other stuff, and if you're interested, we can talk a bit more at the breakouts, but given 18 minutes, I'll keep it on sustainability. So how do we frame our approach? Much like in nutrition, we're really trying to found our sustainability efforts in science to set the record straight. We conducted what is probably the most comprehensive life cycle assessment ever conducted in agriculture that essentially looked at the environmental impacts of about 25% of fluid milk and 25% of milk transport in the country. And we used that to develop a baseline of greenhouse gas emissions and water impacts for dairy. We're using that to develop measurements that can inform tools that farmers and fleets and processors can use to assess their impacts and identify opportunities for improvement. These topics are defined in our Sustainability and Stewardship Guide, which outlines the principles for sustainability, and it also provides general topics and a way to communicate this stuff to consumers. Our overarching mission is to develop a single standardized platform that the industry can use to consistently and credibly communicate our progress. So, with this framework, our first industry commitment was developed, a voluntary goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 25% by the year 2020 across the entire value chain from farm to retail. And the thing that's interesting with this, and the thing that resonates with all aspects of agriculture, is it has to make economic sense for the farmers. And what we've seen here is that this goal is directly connected with improved efficiencies and reduced costs. For instance, savings on your utility bill that can actually result in about $238 million in business value for the industry. And that doesn't include a lot of the bigger blue sky visionary projects that we have in the works, and I'm going to talk about one of those at the end of this presentation. So our life cycle assessment identified that per gallon of milk, this is where the impact areas are. As you can see, enteric and manure management, which are focused on the cow, are the largest emitters of greenhouse gas. Enteric emissions is the methane emissions that comes from a cow, and contrary to popular belief, the vast majority of that is not from the back end of the cow. It's actually the belching or the fermentation that takes place while the feed is digested in the rumen. As for the manure management, we're doing some really cool stuff on that I'm going to talk about here in a minute. And then our smart tools that are really helping to inform better efficiencies and decision-making is something that I'll also spend some time on. So the finding of our life cycle assessment is that the basis for these differences in management practices around improved environmental performance It's not the size, the region, or the age of the farm, but the management practices. And you can see a lot of small farms out there doing some really great stuff. For instance, providing compost to urban areas or conducting energy audits that can actually show, opportunities to improve their efficiencies. But you can also see some really big farms doing some very cool work. There's a farm called Fair Oaks that's about 2 hours from Chicago that has 30,000 cows, and they're actually capturing the manure and using it to generate compressed natural gas that they're fueling their dairy fleets with. So that's a really sustainable source of green energy, and I encourage you guys to go out and visit a dairy farm, whether large or small, and see firsthand what people are doing. So the tools that we've developed are co-created with farmers and for farmers to really provide decision-making and support in the hands of those who actually can control these decisions on the farm. We found through our life cycle assessment that there's only roughly 24 variables that account for 80 to 90% of a farm's environmental impact. So rather than trying to provide some kind of a prescriptive checklist that covers everything under the sun, we're really trying to focus on the measurements that matter most and create an intuitive and helpful tool for farmers to improve both their environmental practices and their economic bottom line. Now, we're just getting started with these efforts, but to date, with a focus strictly on greenhouse gas and energy efficiency, we've tested our FarmSmart tool with roughly 150 million gallons worth of milk production in 11 states. And we're just getting started. So we've recently received a $9.9 million grant that's really going to be focused on decision support around nutrient management plans, soil, climate, and cropping that not only provides an opportunity to set baselines and measure progress, but also informs, better management practices that farmers can do, where they can see, do cost estimates that can show ways it can actually impact their performance on their farm, both environmentally and economically. And as we move into this, we've got a next version of the tool that's going to be coming out in August probably of this year, that's going to touch on a wider breadth of topics, including things like soil management, possibly biodiversity. Definitely we're going to be including water this time around, so we're really trying to check all the boxes. So before I wrap things up, there's one other thing I really want to talk to you guys about that I think is very cool and could potentially have some implications for the coffee industry. You see, when I talked about the innovation in the side of our life cycle assessment, where you really have to have some profound, groundbreaking new approaches, manure management was one of those that was at the very top of the list. And the dairy industry is really starting to try to ramp out anaerobic digesters as a way to do this. Now, for those of you who don't know what anaerobic digesters are, they essentially are an enclosed concrete bunker that captures methane from manure and can burn it as a source of clean energy. And there's a lot of great byproducts that can come from this process in a way that food companies and retailers, people who produce coffee grounds, for instance, could play a role in this. You see, I'm sure folks here know that food waste is a resource. If you compost 2 tons of it a week, you can get 17 tons of nitrogen and 1.3 tons of phosphorus in a year. And that's a great alternative to synthetic fertilizers. However, if that same 2 tons a week is put into a dairy digester with manure from 1,000 cows, you get 226 tons of nitrogen and 28 tons of phosphorus. So you have a lot more nutrients, and you also have green power for roughly 300 homes. The thing that's really interesting about this is manure by itself creates green energy, but adding food waste to it is like putting fuel on a fire, and it can as much as triple the methane output. So food that can't be provided to people or fed to animals, this is a much, much better use for it than putting it into a landfill where it can be a greenhouse gas. So we're really excited about the potential here and also the opportunities to partner with others in the supply chain to really help sustain these nutrient cycles and be more efficient with the resources that we have. So our goal is to move from the 157 digesters in the country that currently exist today to over 2,500. And we're going to be doing this with these transformational partnerships. What we would like to see out of this is green power equivalent to about 800 megawatts, which is the equivalent of a nuclear power plant coming from manure. So this is another source of energy that can really help sustain our economy and help farmers. So if you go to usdairy.com/sustainability, we have a case study of an example of this that's already taking place. This is Jordan Farms. It's in Massachusetts. It's a 350-head operation. And Massachusetts is unique because it's the first state in the country that has actually passed legislation that requires you to divert organic waste from landfills. So you've got a lot of food processing companies that are now looking for alternatives, and what they've done is they've partnered with this dairy, and right now it's only about 25% manure and 75% food waste going into these digesters, creating green energy that's sustaining the farm, providing an additional source of income, and benefiting everybody in the supply chain. So I want you to stay tuned as we continue to go down this process. And I'm also very excited about where we're going with our smart tools and the opportunity over time for the work that the farmers are doing to translate into consumer messaging and really enhance the whole coffee buying experience through what I think is something that's oftentimes overlooked in coffee, but has some really great stories behind it. And I guess that's all I have, but I'd like to thank everybody for your time, and feel free to reach out to me with any questions, and I'll also be in the breakout session today. So thank you.